Firefighters of Reddit. What's the dumbest person you had to save in a stupid situation? Story 1. A motorist had a bad alternator and the car died while he or she was driving. The electric lock control stopped working. We were dispatched for a person trapped in a motor vehicle. On arrival, the advice was given to manually lift the lock knob. You can easily tell the ones who will not survive the first 24 hours of the zombie apocalypse. Story 2. Two bikini-clad girls had to be rescued from a swift-moving river in a canoe. Neither of the girls decided to bring a life vest or a paddle. Story 3. My dad was witness to someone being stupid and rescued by a firefighter. My dad worked for IBM's AS400, a mainframe system, tech support division for over 10 years, from 1992 to 2003. A customer called in because he needed to run a report and send it out to the networked printer. For whatever reason, the report was failing to generate and the guy on the phone was freaking out because some corporate bigwig demanded that this report be printed and on his desk by 3 p.m. Just another day at work. About 10 minutes into the call, my dad starts to hear this strange, high-pitched noise in the background. So he says, if you don't mind me asking, what's that noise in the background? Caller says, oh, that's the fire alarm. Fire alarm? Yeah, the building's on fire. Far be it from me to tell you what to do, but shouldn't you get out of there? Dan, you don't understand. I have to get this report printed. Now, are you going to help me or not? So they continued to troubleshoot the issue. A few minutes after that, my dad hears shouting in the background. So he says, there seems to be a lot of yelling in the background. Is everything okay? Caller says, yeah, it's fine. It's just the firefighters evacuating the building. Shouldn't you get out of there too? Dan, I absolutely have to get this report printed. Are you going to help me? I'm not sure that I should. We pay our support contract. I have to get this printed and you have to help me. It's almost 3 p.m. It's just a report. I don't think it's worth risking your life. The caller starts to get furious, and the shouting in the background gets much louder. A firefighter has to come to the guy on the phone and starts barking orders at him to get out of the building. The caller tells the firefighter, look, I have to print this report before 3 p.m. and I can't leave until it's printed. Over the phone, my dad hears the firefighter scream, I don't give a damn about your goddamn report. The building is on fire. Now move. There's a scuffling noise, and the phone handset on the other end drops to the ground as the firefighter physically drags the caller away. After that, all Dad could hear was the sound of the fire alarm and various crackling noises. Needless to say, the report did not get printed by 3 p.m. Story 4. I was a volunteer firefighter many years back. One summer, after a long period of no rain, two good old boys decided to have a few dozen beers and take their Jeep into a nearby field to go off-roading. Well, around 2 feet tall corn stalks that are bone dry wind up getting jammed up into the undercarriage, which, on a 90-plus degree day, turns out to be hot enough to ignite a fire. The owner of the field sees the situation unfolding from their house and calls for fire and police. Given the proximity to my location, I go directly to the scene after hearing the page go out and see these two a-holes trying to drive the Jeep faster and faster to put the fire out. Eventually, the engine gives out, but they won't leave the car. I physically had to reach in, burning my arms in the process, since I didn't respond to the station first to get my turnout gear, and pull them out. Somehow, they decided that remaining in the car would slow down the flames. And because they thought it was a good idea to continue driving a burning vehicle around a dry field, we now have a significant brush fire and have to call mutual aid from another county to help douse the fire. State police get involved, I have a nice trip to the hospital, and a-holes lose their Jeep and the remainder of their booze. Story 5. Not me, but Dad was a firefighter in New York City, and once responded to a call at a Chinese food restaurant where the owner's walkway was iced over. He apparently didn't speak very good English and maybe misunderstood the job of a fireman? Genuinely, don't know. They salted down his front walkway for him and explained that this was 100% not their job. They all had a good laugh and the guy gave them all free egg rolls. People always used to ask him questions about crazy calls and he never enjoyed talking about that, so he would always tell that story. Happened in '99, still makes me laugh to this day, 20 years later. Story 6. Two I can recall, one specific. The specific one was a young girl around teenage years who decided those toddler swings with a seat you stick their legs through like a little basket so they can't fall out was made for a teenage girl. She got stuck and lost blood flow to her legs. We had to cut her down and get her to a hospital to have it safely removed due to it basically becoming a tourniquet on both her legs. The other is general, but it's people who didn't wear a seatbelt and the people they ended as a result. You have less control of a vehicle when you're not being held in place, so those wrecks are more common, as the first sign of trouble, your butt moves in the seat and reduces your ability to control the vehicle. You also become a projectile. If you're lucky, you only off yourself. If you're not, you wind up bouncing around and ending a passenger. Also, the leading cause of partial ejections and re-entry to vehicles since nothing was holding them to the seats. So many times I could have just been there cutting someone out of a seat and them being barely beat up, but instead they have been scalped and off themselves or hit their kid or spouse or other family member or friend and ended them. One in particular I remember was a large man not wearing a seatbelt in an overturned truck. He woke up while we were working on him, cutting the passenger side up to get down to him as the vehicle was on its side, driver's side down. He kept asking us how his son was. At first, we didn't get it. Then, we realized he was laying on his 16-year-old son, and due to the man's size, we didn't see him. The son was wearing a seatbelt, but he passed, because his father smashed into him and smothered him till he, passed, while we worked, rather than just wear a seatbelt extender so his seatbelt fit. Also, don't lie to us about if you wore it. Your seatbelt won't fire the pretensioners if they are not engaged in the slot. They are designed that way. There's a circuit that is completed by the best being clicked in place, which is also how your car knows your passengers are wearing a seatbelt or not, and sets off that obnoxious alarm. There's also a sensor in the passenger front seat of most modern vehicles to detect the weight of a small person, which is why your sodas or pizzas, sets off the alarm. Just wear the damn seatbelt and don't lie. If you are wearing it, I won't be able to pull tons of slack on it when I arrive. Guess what goes in the report as the determining factor your insurance sees as to if you should have your medical covered as a result of an accident? Yup, I don't know what they do with that information, but I have to write it in the report. Story 7. This is my dad's story, not mine, but I've heard it so many times I think I can accurately tell it here. My dad was on the Boston Fire Department for a little over 35 years. For 13 of those years, he worked at the fire station in Dorchester. In Dorchester, there's a zoo, the Franklin Park Zoo. One morning in late September, they get a call to the Franklin Park Zoo for a young girl mauled by a gorilla. This is the sort of call they'd get all the time. Gorilla jumps at the glass, kid gets scared, parents panic and call 911. So, they hop in the truck and ride on over. It's one of those kind of foggy, early fall mornings as they walk into the zoo. A couple of the other firefighters start walking into the zoo as my dad notices a man sitting on a bench, holding a little girl in his arms. Assuming this is what the call is for, he walks over to the man. The little girl had a scrape on her forehead and she's crying, but it's otherwise fine. The man looks like he just saw a ghost. So, my dad asks the guy what's going on. The man just says, "Little Joe's out." My dad says, "What does that mean?" The man just repeats, "Little Joe was out." So my dad says, "Who the F is Little Joe?" Little Joe is a 500-pound adolescent male silverback gorilla, loose in the streets of Boston. It's right about now that my dad realizes that he's not exactly qualified to handle gorilla, but he doesn't know who to call, so he calls everyone. 2 minutes later, the fire chief shows up not knowing what the call was about yet and jumps out of his car saying, Mark, is this about an effing gorilla?" My dad says, "Yeah, how'd you hear about that?" The chief says, "He's standing at the bus stop on Seaver Street." Now the SWAT team shows up, hats on backwards, M16s in hand, and my dad, being the smart ass he is, looks at the sergeant and says, "Hey, I don't think this thing is armed." He caught a bit of flack for that later on. Animal Control and the SWAT team worked together to take down Little Joe. It took 14 tranquilizer darts before he finally went unconscious. Little Joe is still alive and well at the Franklin Park Zoo. Story 8. I was a Navy corpsman, so this one is probably a bit of a reach, but whatever. Marine comes to sick call with a seriously beaten up private part. Like lacerations, bruising. Thing was really messed up. Asked him what he did, and he insisted that what happened was that he had a surprise boner and it hit his zipped up pants zipper and basically went all garbage disposal on his junk. Dude would not drop this narrative no matter how many times we told him that this just doesn't happen. Finally, Doc, the actual MD, comes in and tells him enough of this crap. Yada yada, write him up for a malingering, need the full story. Dude jammed his wiener into the back of a computer tower. According to him, there was an opening back there. Probably because old PC towers in the Navy routinely had crap swapped out, and they didn't always cover openings when things were removed. So, because he was an effing donkey, he stuck his finger in it and felt a light tingling sensation as his skin made contact with something electrical. So, he took the next logical step and whipped out his PP and shoved it into the back of this computer. What he did not account for was that the opening had sharp metal edges. But once inside, he got that tingling feeling, and so he felt like he might as well finish the job before he pulled out. Plus, this is where I had to stop myself from laughing. He felt it was smarter to pull himself out flaccid rather than hard. This was not a young man. This was not a man without rank.